The blood on her hands wasn't hers, and that's what terrified her most. Noor Inayat Khan stood frozen in the darkened stairwell of Gestapo headquarters, her breath coming in shallow, silent gasps that fogged the October air. 3 floors below, boots hammered against marble like gunshots. 3 floors above, a man lay slumped over his desk, a teacup still warm beside his lifeless fingers. Between them, pressed against cold concrete that smelled of disinfectant and fear, stood a 30-year-old woman who had just committed the impossible. She had stolen from the devil himself. The manila folder tucked inside her coat felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Operation Celian contingency plans, convoy routes through the Baltic. Names, dozens of names of double agents embedded in London, their handlers, their safe houses. Information that could save hundreds of lives or end hers in the next 60 seconds. The boots stopped. Noor's heart stopped with them. She could hear voices now, German, sharp, and efficient. One of them laughed, a sound so ordinary it made her stomach turn. How could anyone laugh in a building where screams echoed from the basement at all hours, where the walls themselves seemed to weep? Her instructor's voice whispered through her memory. Fear is a luxury, Noor. The moment you feel it, you're already dead. Think, always think, she thought. The window at the landing, painted black for air raid protection. But she'd noticed earlier it was slightly ajar. The servant's entrance she'd mapped 3 days ago while posing as a cleaning woman. The stolen Gestapo identity papers in her left pocket, still warm from the body of Fräulein Hilde Müller, who would wake in approximately 40 minutes with a headache, and no memory of the woman who'd drugged her coffee. 40 minutes. She'd needed 60. The boots started again, climbing now, methodical as a metronome. 2 sets, maybe 3. She couldn't tell through the pounding in her ears. Noor moved. Not down. They'd expect down. Not up. That's where Hauptsturmführer Vogel lay cooling in his chair, the cyanide she'd slipped into his tea working faster than she'd anticipated. She'd wanted him unconscious, not dead. But war doesn't care about intentions. She moved sideways, pushing through a service door she'd oiled yesterday during her cleaning shift. The hinges whispered rather than screamed. Small mercies. The corridor beyond was narrow, lit by a single bulb that flickered like a dying heartbeat. Doors lined both sides, offices, storage rooms, places where secrets festered in filing cabinets and locked drawers. She'd been in one of those rooms an hour ago. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else, someone braver. Someone who hadn't stood at the window of her Paris apartment 2 months earlier, watching the Gestapo load her fellow resistance fighters into trucks. Someone who hadn't heard the gunshots that followed at dawn. 16 people. 16 friends. Gone because someone talked. The folder inside her coat suddenly felt lighter. She reached the end of the corridor and pressed her ear against the exit door. Silence. But silence in Gestapo headquarters was never really silent. It was the held breath before the scream, the moment between the trigger pull and the bullet's arrival. Through the door. Down another stairwell. This one servant's access, walls painted institutional green that looked gray in the dim light. Her shoes made no sound. She'd chosen them carefully. Everything about tonight had been chosen carefully, planned obsessively, rehearsed until every movement was muscle memory. Except for Vogel dying. Except for the blood on her hands. She'd wiped them on her coat, but she could still feel it. Sticky, warm, accusatory. He'd been a monster, she knew this. She'd read his file. 43 interrogations personally conducted. At least 12 deaths attributed to his enhanced techniques. A wife in Munich. 2 daughters. Did they know what their father did in the basement of this building? Would her own father recognize her anymore? The thought came unbidden, unwanted. Hazrat Inayat Khan, Sufi mystic, teacher of peace and universal love. What would he say if he could see his gentle Noor now? His little daughter who'd written children's stories about talking animals and magical gardens. The girl who'd cried when she accidentally stepped on a butterfly? She pushed the thought away. Pushed everything away except the next step, the next breath, the next choice. Ground floor. The servant's exit was 15 meters ahead, Past the kitchen that still smelled of boiled cabbage and ersatz coffee. Past the coat room where SS officers hung their caps and holsters before ascending to their orderly desks and tidy atrocities. Past the janitor's closet where she'd hidden her civilian clothes this morning, a lifetime ago, when she was still Jeanne-Marie Renier, a simple French cleaning woman with perfect papers and a forgettable face. 10 meters. A door opened behind her. Noor didn't run. Running was confession. Running was death. She walked, steady and purposeful, like she belonged here. Like she had every right to be in Gestapo headquarters at 9:30 in the evening, with stolen files burning against her ribs and another woman's blood under her fingernails. Halt! The voice was male, young, uncertain. Not a shout, but a question. She could work with questions. She turned slowly, schooling her face into mild curiosity. The soldier was barely 20, his uniform still crisp, his face still soft with youth that hadn't yet been carved away by what he'd witnessed here. His hand rested on his holster but hadn't drawn. She spoke in perfect German, with just a hint of a Bavarian accent. Yes, sir? The honorific confused him. He was enlisted, not an officer. Good. Confusion was her ally. What are you doing here? Less certain now, authority wobbling. Hauptsturmführer Vogel requested fresh linens for his office. She patted her coat, where the folder pressed against her. He works late most nights. Very dedicated. Truth wrapped in lies, the best kind. The young soldier nodded slowly. Everyone knew Vogel worked late. Everyone knew better than to disturb him. I haven't seen you before, he said. But it was observation, not accusation. Started last week. She smiled, small, tired, the smile of a woman at the end of a long shift. Still learning where everything is. He almost let her go. She could see it in his eyes, the desire to return to whatever had been interrupted. But duty pulled at him, or maybe just boredom. Papers? Her hand moved to her pocket with practiced ease. No hesitation. Hesitation was guilt. The forged identity booklet was perfect. She knew this because she'd made it herself in the basement of a bookshop in Le Marais. Her hands steady even as Allied bombs fell close enough to rattle the windows. He examined them with the thoroughness of someone new enough to still follow every procedure. She watched his eyes move across the stamps, the photograph, the employment record. Perfect. All of it perfect. Because perfect was the only thing that kept you alive when you lived in the margins of other people's nightmares. Behind them, somewhere in the building's upper floors, someone shouted. The young soldier's head snapped up. The shout came again. Urgent now. Alarmed. Words tumbled down the stairwell like falling stones. Hauptsturmführer Vogel. Someone call a doctor. The soldier's eyes met hers. In that instant, Noor saw her death. Saw the moment his training would overcome his uncertainty. Saw his hand moving toward his holster. His mouth opening to call for backup. His body positioning between her and the exit. She thought of her mother in England, waiting for letters that came less and less frequently. She thought of her brother, who'd begged her not to volunteer for Special Operations Executive. She thought of the 16 friends who died because someone talked. She thought of all the names in the folder, people who would die if she didn't walk out of this building. The young soldier's hand touched his weapon. Noor moved first. Not toward him. Toward the commotion. She grabbed his arm, her face alive with concern, and pulled him toward the stairwell. Quickly! The Hauptsturmführer needs help! It was the last thing he expected. The last thing anyone would expect from someone with something to hide. And in that moment of cognitive dissonance, when his brain struggled to reconcile her actions with his suspicions, she pressed something into his hand. Get this to the infirmary. Tell them he may have been poisoned. I'll check his office for anything unusual. She was already moving, back the way she'd come, toward the chaos upstairs, like someone trying to help. The soldier stared at the object in his hand, a vial of activated charcoal from the medical supply closet she'd raided earlier, and instinct took over. He ran toward the infirmary. Noor counted to 5, then turned and walked calmly, unhurriedly, toward the servants' exit. The door opened to a Berlin night thick with the threat of rain. The air tasted of coal smoke and coming winter. Somewhere in the distance, Air raid sirens began their nightly lament. Early tonight. Or perhaps she'd lost track of time. Time had become slippery lately, stretching and compressing like something alive. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped into the street. Behind her, Gestapo headquarters blazed with light and rising panic. Ahead, the darkness welcomed her like an old friend. She walked neither fast nor slow, just another Berliner hurrying home before the bombers came. 3 blocks away, she ducked into an alley and finally let herself breathe. The folder came out of her coat. Even in the darkness, she could see the eagle and swastika stamped on its cover. Classification marks. Secret. Her hands shook now. Now that it was over, now that the immediate danger had passed, her body finally permitted itself the luxury of terror. She'd done it. She'd walked into the heart of Nazi intelligence and walked out with their secrets. Twice. Because this wasn't the first time. Last month, she'd stolen encryption keys from an office 2 floors down. Before that, troop deployment schedules. Each time, she'd told herself it would be the last. Each time, London sent another message. Urgent. Vital intelligence required. You're the only asset in position. Each time, she said yes. Because 16 friends were dead. Because her country was dying under occupation. Because someone had to walk through walls when walls were all that remained. Noor tucked the folder back inside her coat and merged with the shadows. In 4 hours, she'd make the dead drop at the Tiergarten. In 6 hours, these secrets would begin their journey to London. In 8 hours, she'd return to her cover identity, teaching piano to the children of Nazi officials, smiling and curtsying and pretending her hands had never been stained with blood. But in this moment, in this stolen breath between heartbeats, she allowed herself a single thought. How many more times can I be this lucky? The answer came from the darkness itself, cold and certain. 1 less than you'll need to be. Somewhere behind her, back at Gestapo headquarters, they would be finding Hauptsturmführer Vogel. They would be questioning the young soldier. They would be reviewing security logs and interrogating cleaning staff. And slowly, methodically, inevitably, they would begin to understand that someone had breached their fortress, and they would be searching for a ghost who was already planning her return. Because in the folders she'd seen tonight, the ones she couldn't carry, the ones that required another impossible theft, was information about a roundup, next month. French resistance leaders, all of them, in one coordinated strike. 16 friends had died because someone talked. She wouldn't let it be 100, nor disappeared into the Berlin night, carrying secrets that weighed more than bodies, and the certain knowledge that the most dangerous mission was always the next one. Behind her, the city burned with searchlights and suspicion. Ahead, the darkness waited to swallow her whole. The dead drop was a hollowed-out brick in the Tiergarten's eastern wall, third from the lamppost that no longer worked. Noor reached it at 2 in the morning, when Berlin belonged to rats and collaborators and people like her, people who moved through the darkness with purpose that couldn't survive daylight. The folder slid into the cavity with a whisper. She replaced the brick and walked away without looking back. Looking back was how you got caught. She knew this because she'd seen it happen. Paris, spring of last year, a courier named André who couldn't resist checking if his tail was still following. That single glance over his shoulder was all the Gestapo needed. They'd been waiting for confirmation, for that one gesture of guilt. He'd been dead within the week. Noor kept her eyes forward and thought about piano scales. C major, G major, D major, the simple progressions she taught to the Oberst's daughter every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Little Greta, 9 years old, with braids so blonde they looked white in certain light, and a gap-toothed smile that made Noor's heart crack every time. The child had talent, real talent. Her small fingers found notes with an instinct that couldn't be taught. Her father had ordered the execution of 300 French civilians last month in retaliation for a sabotage supply train. This was the math of occupation, the arithmetic of survival. Good people didn't exist anymore. Only degrees of compromise, shades of complicity, and the question that haunted every quiet moment. Where is the line? and have I already crossed it? The safe house was in Charlottenburg, third floor of a building that had survived the bombing raids through either luck or divine intervention. Frau Weber, the landlady, asked no questions because her son was hiding from the draft in a farm outside Dresden. Everyone had something to hide. The whole city was built on secrets stacked like cards, waiting for the wind to blow. Noor climbed the stairs in darkness, counting steps from memory. 13 to the first landing, 12 to the second, 14 to the third, because the building had settled unevenly, sagging under the weight of its own survival. The key was in her shoe, where they'd never think to look during a body search, not the first place they'd look anyway. Inside, she allowed herself 60 seconds of weakness. Her hands shook so violently she couldn't unbuckle her coat. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the wall to the floor, where she sat like a broken doll, breathing in gasps that sounded too loud in the small room. The blood under her fingernails had dried to brown flakes. Vogel's blood. A monster's blood. But blood that had once pumped through a human heart, carried oxygen to a human brain that had somehow learned to enjoy the sound of screaming. How did people become that? How did she become this? Someone who could drug a man's tea and walk away while he died. The tears came suddenly, violently, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to silence the sobs. Crying was dangerous. Crying meant the neighbors might hear, might wonder, might mention to the wrong person that the French piano teacher seemed upset that night. Every sound was a potential death sentence. She cried anyway because sometimes the body demands what the mind knows it cannot afford. 5 minutes. She gave herself 5 minutes to be human. Then she stood, washed her hands in the basin until the water ran clear, and became Jean-Marie Renier again. Simple. Forgettable. The kind of woman you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The radio was hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Mein Kampf. A joke that would have been funny if everything wasn't so completely unfunny. She pulled it out with practiced efficiency, extended the antenna, and tuned to the frequency that changed every 48 hours according to a schedule she'd memorized, and then burned. 3 clicks. Pause. 2 clicks. Pause. 1 click. The response came 30 seconds later, too fast. They were waiting for her. That meant something had changed. The Morse code message came through in bursts. Vogel dead. Building lockdown. Investigation intensive. Abort further operations. Extract Protocol Alpha. Confirm. Her hand hovered over the key. Extract meant run. Extract meant a nighttime crossing into France, then Spain, then Gibraltar, then home. Safety. Her mother's face, her brother's laugh. Tea that didn't taste like fear. Sleep without nightmares of boots and hallways. It also meant abandoning the intelligence about the roundup. 100 French resistance leaders. 1 coordinated strike. Without warning, they'd walk into a trap, and she'd be in England, safe and useless, while they died. 16 friends. 100 more. The math was simple, the choice was impossible. Her fingers moved across the key. Negative. 1 more operation. Critical intelligence. Roundup data. Cannot abort. Will extract after. Confirm. The silence that followed lasted 3 minutes. Long enough for her to imagine the argument in London. The SOE handlers reviewing her psychological profile, questioning her judgment, weighing the value of one agent against potential intelligence. She'd been trained to follow orders. Trained to understand that individuals were expendable when measured against strategic objectives. She wondered if they'd taught Vogel the same thing. The response finally came. Negative. Too dangerous. Extract immediately. This is direct order. She stared at the message. Thought about Andre, looking over his shoulder. Thought about Greta's gap-toothed smile and her father's signature on death warrants. Thought about the 16 friends who'd screamed in Gestapo basements while she lived free because she'd been in Paris that day, visiting her sick aunt, alive through pure accident of timing. Her fingers moved. Understood. Will comply. Extract Protocol Alpha. 3 days. Give me 3 days. She clicked off before they could argue, collapsed the antenna, and hid the radio back inside Hitler's manifesto. 3 days to plan the impossible. 3 days to walk through walls one last time. Then she could go home. If home still existed for people who'd done what she'd done. The Oberst's house was in Grunewald, where the trees grew thick enough to pretend the war was somewhere else. Noor arrived at 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon, punctual as always, her leather music folder tucked under her arm like a shield. The maid, Helga, answered the door with the tight smile of someone who'd learned not to trust the French. Fräulein Renier, Greta is waiting in the music room. Thank you, Helga. The house smelled of furniture polish and old money. Oil paintings lined the hallways, landscapes mostly, pastoral scenes that belonged to a Germany that maybe never existed. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed the Oberst himself, uniform jacket unbuttoned, speaking on the telephone in clipped, angry tones. Unacceptable security breach, heads will roll. I don't care if he was decorated at Stalingrad. She kept walking, kept her face neutral, kept every muscle relaxed even as her heart hammered against her ribs. They knew about Vogel. Of course they knew. The question was what they knew, how much they'd pieced together. Whether the young soldier had remembered her face clearly enough to describe to a sketch artist. Greta was at the piano, practicing scales with the dedication of someone who'd been told practice makes perfect and believed it absolutely. She looked up when Noor entered, and her whole face transformed with joy. Fräulein Renier, I've been working on the Beethoven. Listen. Her small hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence. The Für Elise theme emerged, slightly halting but recognizable. Earnest, pure. The sound of a child trying to touch something beautiful in a world that had forgotten what beauty meant. Noor sat beside her on the bench. That's lovely, Greta. But remember, it's not just about hitting the right notes. It's about the feeling between them. The silence is part of the music too. She demonstrated, playing the phrase with the subtle pauses, the breathing space that made melody into emotion. Greta watched her hands with reverent attention. Like that? Exactly like that. They worked for an hour. Scales, arpeggios, the Beethoven piece. Greta giggled when she made mistakes and bit her lip in concentration when Noor corrected her hand position. A normal Thursday. A normal lesson. As if Noor's fingernails weren't still stained with the ghost of a man's blood. As if this child's father wasn't a monster. As if the world wasn't burning just outside these walls. Fräulein Renier? Greta's voice was small, uncertain. Are you sad? The question caught her off guard. Why do you ask? You seem sad sometimes. When you think I'm not looking. Children saw everything. It was easy to forget. Noor smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Greta's forehead. Sometimes I miss my home. But music helps. That's the beautiful thing about music. It's the same in every language. It means we're never truly alone. Greta considered this with the seriousness of someone 9 years old trying to understand adult sadness. I like when you're here. Mother says you play like an angel. Your mother is very kind. Father says the French are cowards, but I don't think you're a coward. The innocence of it was devastating. The casual way she'd absorbed her father's prejudices while simultaneously rejecting them based on the evidence of her own experience. She was trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense, using whatever pieces she'd been given. Just like everyone else. People are complicated, Greta. We're all trying to do our best with what we understand. It was a terrible answer. Insufficient. But what could she say? Your father is a war criminal, and I'm a spy, and we're both trying to survive in a world that demands we become monsters. The lesson ended at 4:30. Greta hugged her goodbye, a spontaneous gesture that made Noor want to weep. Then she was back in the hallway, music folder under her arm, walking past oil paintings toward the exit. The Oberst stepped out of his study. Fräulein Renier, a moment. Her blood froze. Her smile didn't falter. Of course, Herr Oberst. His office smelled of cigar smoke and leather. Maps covered one wall. Invasion routes, supply lines, tactical positions. The machinery of conquest rendered in colored pins and pencil marks. He gestured to a chair. She sat. My daughter speaks very highly of you. His German was Berlin sharp, every consonant a small blade. She's a talented student, a pleasure to teach. You've been with us. How long now? 4 months, Herr Oberst. And before that? Paris, you said. This was it. The moment everything unraveled or held together. She could feel the weight of the conversation, the way he was measuring her responses, looking for cracks in her story. Yes, sir. I taught at a conservatory before the occupation. When things became difficult, I thought Berlin might offer more opportunities. Difficult how? The economy. Food shortages. You understand. He nodded slowly, watching her with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. There was an incident at Gestapo headquarters, a security breach. I heard something about that. Terrible. Hauptsturmführer Vogel died. Poisoned, they believe. She let her face show appropriate shock. That's horrible. They're questioning everyone who was in the building that evening. Staff, visitors, everyone. He paused. You weren't there, were you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But running was confession. Running was death. She met his eyes. Me? No, Herr Oberst. I was home that evening. Why do you ask? No reason. Just being thorough. These are dangerous times. One can never be too careful about who they trust. Of course. He studied her for another long moment, then waved his hand in dismissal. That's all. I'll see you next week. She stood, gathered her folder, walked to the door with legs that felt like water. Fräulein Renier? She turned. Yes? My daughter is fond of you. I'd hate for anything to disrupt her lessons. The threat was subtle, almost gentle, but unmistakable. I understand, Herr Oberst. I'll make sure nothing disrupts our schedule. Outside, the October air tasted like freedom. She walked 3 blocks before her hands stopped shaking. 5 blocks before she was certain no one was following. The Oberst suspected something. Maybe not specifically her. Maybe just the general paranoia that infected everyone in this city like a disease. But he was watching. They were all watching. 3 days until extraction. One more impossible theft before she could leave. And a 9-year-old girl who'd called her an angel, whose father signed death warrants between breakfast and lunch, who was learning Beethoven in a house built on bones. Noor walked through the Berlin streets as the sun set early and the searchlights began their nightly dance. Somewhere in this city, in filing cabinets and locked safes, was information about a roundup that would kill 100 people. She'd walked through walls twice. Once more wouldn't kill her. Probably. The lie tasted bitter, but she swallowed it anyway, because lies were all that kept you alive when the truth meant death. The blueprint arrived in a loaf of bread. Noor found it at the bakery on Kantstrasse, wrapped in wax paper inside the dark rye she bought every Friday morning. Frau Zimmermann, the baker's wife, had hands like tree roots and eyes that never quite met yours. She also had a brother in the resistance and a granddaughter who'd been sent east on a train that never came back. Everyone had reasons. The blueprint was hand-drawn on tissue paper, thin enough to dissolve in water if discovered. 4th floor, west wing, records room, guard rotations, lock types. The location of the files she needed, Operation Nachtfalter, Night Butterfly, the roundup plan that would sweep through France like a scythe through wheat. Someone inside Gestapo headquarters was helping her. She didn't know who, didn't want to know. Names were liabilities. The less you knew, the less you could reveal under interrogation. And everyone talked eventually. That was the terrible truth they didn't tell you in training. Everyone had a breaking point. The only question was how long you could hold out before reaching it. Noor memorized the blueprint over black coffee that tasted like burned dirt. Traced the roots with her finger until they lived in her muscle memory. Then she burned it in the sink, watching the tissue paper curl and blacken, transforming information into ash and ash into safety. 2 days until extraction. 1 final theft. She dressed for invisibility. Gray wool coat, practical shoes, hair pinned back in a style that made her face forgettable. The mirror showed her a woman who could disappear into crowds, who possessed the superpower of being overlooked. Plain. Unremarkable. Exactly what she needed to be. The streets of Berlin moved with the strange rhythm of a city under siege. People hurried without running, spoke without raising their voices, existed without quite living. Rationing had carved away the excess, leaving only essential movements, necessary words. The city had become efficient in its misery. She took the U-Bahn to Stadtmitte, 3 stops past where she needed to go, then doubled back on foot. Standard tradecraft. Always assume you're being followed. Always have an excuse for where you're going. Always, always, always have an exit plan. Gestapo headquarters looked different in daylight. Less ominous. Almost ordinary, if you ignored the guards at the entrance and the screams that sometimes carried through ventilation grates. Architecture was neutral. It was what happened inside buildings that made them monstrous. Nor didn't go through the front entrance. She circled to the service alley where deliveries arrived. Coal, food, office supplies, all the mundane necessities that kept the machinery of oppression running smoothly. A truck was unloading crates of files from another office. She watched for 17 minutes, timing the guards' patterns, memorizing faces, counting seconds between cigarette breaks. Then she picked up a clipboard from an empty crate and walked straight toward the entrance like she belonged there. Confidence was the best disguise. People saw what they expected to see. A woman with a clipboard, wearing practical clothes, moving with purpose. Obviously someone who worked here. Obviously someone who had every right to be walking through that door. The guard barely glanced at her. Papers. She handed over Jean-Marie Renier's identification, the French cleaning woman who'd worked here for 6 weeks before mysteriously disappearing. The papers were perfect because she'd stolen them from the real Jean-Marie, who was now safely in Switzerland, probably wondering why a stranger had drugged her coffee and taken her identity documents. The guard studied the photo, looked at her face. Back to the photo. Her heart was a drum. Her face was a mask. "You're late," he said finally, waving her through. She nodded, apologetic. Trains were delayed. Air raid last night. He grunted. Everyone understood air raids, and returned to his newspaper. She was already forgettable, already forgotten. Just another worker ant in the colony of bureaucratic evil. Inside, the building smelled exactly as she remembered. Disinfectant trying to cover something darker. Floor wax. Old paper. Fear. The architects of genocide worked in offices that could have belonged to accountants or lawyers or university administrators. Horror wore a suit and tie and filed reports in triplicate. 4th floor, west wing, records room. The blueprint had shown her the back stairs, narrower, less trafficked, used mostly by cleaning staff and maintenance workers. She climbed them with a bucket and mop she'd collected from a supply closet. Props. Every good magician understood the power of props. At the 4th floor landing, she paused. Listened. Footsteps above her, fading. Voices somewhere distant, muffled by walls and closed doors. A typewriter's mechanical rhythm. Someone documenting atrocity with the same bureaucratic efficiency they might use for inventory reports. The hallway was empty. She moved quickly now, each step measured, each breath controlled. The records room was the 3rd door on the left, marked with a small placard. Archiv Zugang beschränkt. Archive, restricted access. The lock was standard issue. She'd practiced on an identical model for 3 weeks in a London basement that smelled of mildew and desperation. The picks were sewn into her coat lining, thin as needles, strong as faith. Her hands knew what to do. Muscle memory took over when thinking became dangerous. 15 seconds. The lock clicked. She was inside. The room was smaller than expected, lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets painted the same institutional gray as every government office in every country. As if choosing the most depressing color possible was some kind of international bureaucratic standard. Operation Nachtfalter. Night Butterfly. The blueprint had indicated the location, Cabinet 7, Drawer 3, Section B. She found it in 90 seconds. The file was thick, meticulously organized, filled with names and dates and locations. 143 French resistance leaders. Not 100. 143. They'd been thorough. Obsessively thorough. Each name had a corresponding address, known associates, daily routines. The planning was remarkable in its attention to detail. In another context, you might call it impressive. In this context, it was a shopping list for murder. Noor's hands shook as she photographed each page with the Minox camera hidden in her compact. The tiny shutter clicks sounded impossibly loud in the silence. Each photo was a life potentially saved. Each second was a moment closer to discovery. She was on page 7 when the door opened. Time stopped. The man in the doorway wore an SS uniform, Hauptsturmführer insignia on his collar. Young, maybe 30, with the kind of face that belonged in university libraries, not torture chambers. He carried a file folder and wore an expression of mild surprise. "Who are you?" "Not aggressive." "Not yet. Just curious." Every possible response flashed through Noor's mind in the space of a heartbeat. Run. Impossible. He blocked the exit. Attack. Laughable. He was twice her size and armed. Lie. The only option left. She didn't think. Thinking took too long. She reacted. Oh, thank God. She clutched the file to her chest, breathless. I've been looking everywhere for someone. The courier took the wrong folder this morning, and Oberfuhrer Strauss will have my head if these aren't in his office by noon. The words tumbled out in perfect German with just enough panic to sound authentic. She took a step toward him, holding out the file like it was a bomb about to explode. I'm new. I don't know the filing system, and everyone just keeps yelling at me. Please, can you tell me where Strauss's office is? 3rd floor? 4th? I've been wandering for 20 minutes. The Hauptsturmführer's confusion was visible. She was talking too fast, overwhelming him with desperate words and bureaucratic anxiety. He raised a hand to stop her. Wait, what department are you? Liaison. I'm supposed to be coordinating with records, but nobody told me the procedures, and I just want to deliver these files and not get fired. She thrust the Operation Nachtfalter folder toward him. Can you just show me where? He took the folder reflexively. Basic human instinct. Someone hands you something. You take it. In that moment, while his attention was on the papers in his hands, Noor's hand went to her coat pocket. Not for a weapon. She didn't carry weapons. Weapons meant you intended violence, and intention changed everything. Her fingers found the small vial instead, the same fast-acting sedative she'd used on the real Jean-Marie. This isn't... He looked up from the folder, suspicion finally crystallizing into certainty. These are classified. She stumbled forward, deliberately clumsy, colliding with him as she pretended to lose her balance. Her hand came up to steady herself against his chest. The needle was barely visible, just a pinprick through fabric. He felt it. Started to push her away. Too late. The sedative was designed for speed. 10 seconds to unconsciousness. 30 seconds to complete memory loss of the preceding minute. She counted in her head while maintaining the charade of steadying herself. I'm so sorry, these shoes. I'm so clumsy. His eyes went unfocused. She caught him as his knees buckled, guiding his fall so he wouldn't hit his head. Even now, even in this moment of pure survival, some part of her cared about not causing unnecessary harm. She dragged him behind a filing cabinet, checked his pulse, steady. He'd wake in 20 minutes with a headache and no memory of a French woman with desperate eyes. Small mercies. Back to the file. Pages 8 through 15. Click, click, click. Each photo burned into film, each image a map to salvation or damnation depending on whether she escaped this building. Finished. She returned the file to its drawer, straightened her coat, picked up her forgotten mop and bucket. The camera went back into her compact. Evidence disappeared into pockets and linings and the gaps between what people looked for and what they found. She checked the hallway. Empty. Stepped out. Closed the door behind her. Walked toward the stairs with the measured pace of someone who'd accomplished a tedious task and was ready for lunch. Behind her, an SS officer slept the dreamless sleep of the drugged. Ahead, the stairs descended toward ground floor and freedom. She made it 3 steps before the alarm sounded. Not a fire alarm, something worse. A security breach alarm. Sharp, urgent, designed to lock down the building and trap whoever had triggered it. Had the officer been found already? Had someone reviewed the security logs from Vogel's death and connected patterns? Doors slammed. Boots thundered through hallways. Commands echoed off walls. Lock all exits. No one leaves. Search every floor. Nor was suddenly a salmon swimming upstream through a river of SS uniforms. Everyone was moving with purpose. Soldiers to their stations, secretaries to their desks, clerks to defensive positions. She moved with them, another body in the chaos, clutching her mop like a talisman. The front entrance was blocked. Guards had formed a checkpoint, demanding papers from everyone trying to leave. She watched 3 people get turned away, sent back inside for additional verification. The net was tightening. She couldn't go forward, couldn't go back. The trap was closing with mechanical efficiency. Think, her instructor's voice. When trapped, change the rules. When the game is rigged, flip the board. The bathroom window, 3rd floor, east side. She'd noticed it during her cleaning shifts. Painted shut, overlooking a service alley, 3-story drop to concrete below. Impossible to use as an exit, unless you were desperate enough. She abandoned the mop, moved against the flow of traffic toward the bathrooms. A soldier grabbed her arm. "Where are you going?" "Sick," she gasped, hand to her mouth. "Going to be sick." He released her with disgust. Nobody wanted to deal with vomit. She stumbled into the women's bathroom, locked herself in the last stall, and climbed onto the toilet. The window was exactly where she remembered. Painted shut, as expected. She used her lockpick to scrape away decades of paint, working the frame until it loosened. The alarm kept wailing. Boots kept thundering past. Time kept running out. The window opened with a groan. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and freedom. She looked down. 3 stories. Fire escape 20 feet to the right, but it might as well have been 20 miles. The alley below was empty except for trash bins and broken cobblestones. This was insane. This was suicide. This was the only option left. Noor climbed through the window. The ledge was maybe 6 inches wide, slick with October rain. She pressed her back against the building, inching sideways, each step a negotiation with gravity. Don't look down. Don't think about falling. Don't imagine bones breaking on cobblestones. The fire escape was 15 feet away, 10 feet, 5. Her foot slipped. For one infinite moment, she was falling, wind rushing past, ground rushing up. Every mistake and every choice and every stolen file flashing before her eyes. Her hand caught the fire escape railing. The impact nearly tore her arm from its socket. She hung there, suspended between building and nothing, muscles screaming, grip slipping on wet metal. She pulled. Used muscles she didn't know she had. Hauled herself up and over the railing, collapsing on the metal grating, gasping like a landed fish. Below, the alarm kept shrieking. Above, clouds gathered for rain. She was outside. She was alive. She had the photos. Noor climbed down the fire escape, dropped the last 6 feet into the alley, and walked away from Gestapo headquarters like a woman who just finished her shift. Tired. Ordinary. Forgettable. 3 blocks away, she found a cafe and ordered coffee she didn't drink. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold the cup. The compact with the camera sat in her pocket like a nuclear reactor, hot and dangerous and vital. 143 names. 143 lives. She'd done it. She'd walked through walls a 3rd time. The last time. Now she just had to survive long enough to get the photos to London. 1 day until extraction. 36 hours until she could stop being a ghost. If she lived that long. The knock came at 4 in the morning. Noor woke from a dream where she was falling, falling forever. For one disoriented moment, she thought the knock was part of the dream. Then it came again. Patient, methodical, the kind of knock that knew you were inside and had all the time in the world to wait. Gestapo. She knew before she looked. Knew from the rhythm. Knew from the hour. Knew from the way her body flooded with adrenaline before her mind fully understood the danger. The compact with the photos was in her coat pocket. The radio was in the hollowed-out book. Her identity papers, both sets, were in the false bottom of her suitcase. Evidence everywhere. Enough to hang her twice. Fräulein Renier? A voice through the door. Male. calm, almost polite. "We need to speak with you. Please open the door." Her mind raced through possibilities. They knew. They didn't know. They suspected. They were checking everyone. The young soldier had remembered her face. The drugged officer had recovered his memory. Someone had reviewed security footage and connected patterns. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. She was caught. "One moment," she called out in French-accented German, making her voice sleepy, confused. "Let me get dressed." She moved fast. The radio went out the window first, dropped into the darkness of the alley below where it would shatter on cobblestones. The compact, no, she couldn't throw that. The photos were everything. 143 lives. She tucked it into her undergarments, the only place they might hesitate to search immediately. The false identity papers went down the toilet. She flushed once, twice, willing them to disappear. Jean-Marie Renier drowned in Berlin plumbing, another ghost dissolving into water. "Fräulein Renier, open the door now, or we will break it down." She opened it. 3 men. 2 in SS uniforms. 1 in civilian clothes with the dead eyes of someone who'd seen too much and felt too little. The Gestapo officer, she knew the type by now, smiled with teeth that had never learned warmth. "I apologize for the hour. May we come in?" It wasn't a question. They entered like water finding cracks, spreading throughout the small room with practiced efficiency. 1 checked the bathroom. 1 examined her suitcase. The civilian stood too close, invading her space, watching her face for reactions. "There was an incident yesterday at headquarters. A security breach. Files were photographed." He said it casually, like discussing the weather. "We're questioning everyone who's worked in the building. Routine procedure." "You understand?" "Of course." Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Inside she was screaming. "How can I help?" "Where were you yesterday afternoon? Between 2 and 4 o'clock. "Teaching." The lie came smooth as silk. "The Oberst's daughter, Greta. Piano lesson from 3 to 4:30. I can give you the address." "We have the address." He pulled out a notepad. "And before that?" "Errands. The bakery on Kahnstrasse, the post office, my ration coupons." Truth wrapped in lies. "The best kind. Anyone who can verify this?" "The baker's wife, Frau Zimmermann. She knows me." He wrote this down. "And you saw nothing unusual at headquarters during your previous cleaning shifts? Nothing suspicious?" "No, sir. Just offices and filing cabinets. Very boring work." He studied her face. She let him look. Let him see a tired Frenchwoman who taught piano and cleaned offices and wanted nothing more than to survive the war. Boring. Forgettable. Exactly what she needed to be. "Your papers, please." She handed over Noor Inayat Khan's real documents. The British ones she'd kept hidden, now her only option. French civilian identity, work permit, residence registration. All genuine. All useless if they looked too closely. The officer examined them with the thoroughness of someone paid to find discrepancies. "You've been in Berlin since June, 4 months. And before that?" "Paris. I taught at a conservatory." "Which conservatory?" She named one. Hoped they wouldn't check. Knew they would. The other officers had finished their search. 1 shook his head slightly. Nothing found, yet. The toilet gurgled, still digesting identity papers. The compact pressed against her skin like a hot coal. "We'll need you to come to headquarters. Answer a few more questions. Standard procedure." The civilian smiled. "Nothing to worry about." Everything to worry about. Once inside headquarters, she'd never leave. They'd search her properly. Find the photos. Connect her to Vogel's death, to the files, to everything. "Of course," she said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself." He gestured to the door. "After you." The stairs creaked as they descended. 3 flights. Each step closer to the end. She thought about running. Thought about the cyanide pill sewn into her coat lining, the one she was supposed to take before capture. Thought about her mother in England, who'd never know what happened to her daughter. The street was empty except for a black Mercedes idling at the curb. Engine running, exhaust white in the cold morning air. The rear door stood open like a mouth. This was it. The moment she'd been training for. The moment every agent feared. The transition from hunter to prey, from ghost to prisoner, from person to statistic. She took a step toward the car, and Greta ran around the corner. "Fräulein Renier!" The girl's voice split the dawn. She was in her nightgown, bare feet on cold cobblestones, blonde braids flying. "Fräulein Renier, you forgot your music." She held up a folder. Noor's leather music folder from Tuesday's lesson. Time crystallized. Everyone froze. The officers, Noor. Even the morning itself seemed to hold its breath. Greta ran straight to her, threw her arms around Noor's waist. "Mother was so worried you'd left it behind. She said I should return it before your next lesson." The civilian officer's expression shifted. Calculation, reassessment. The daughter of Oberst Richter, the Oberst who'd questioned Noor just days ago, embracing the suspect French piano teacher like she was family. "You teach the Oberst's daughter?" His voice had changed, wariness replacing confidence. "Yes, sir, every Tuesday and Thursday." Greta looked up at the officers with 9-year-old indignation. "Why are these men bothering you? Father says you're the best piano teacher in Berlin." The weight of that statement settled over the street like snow. The best piano teacher in Berlin, trusted by an Oberst, teaching his daughter. The geometry of suspicion suddenly included complications. Political complications, career complications. The kind that made arrests messy. The civilian officer's jaw tightened. He looked at Noor, at Greta, at the Mercedes waiting. Mathematics of risk versus reward playing across his face. "We'll be in touch, Fräulein Renier. Don't leave the city." "Of course not. Where would I go?" He didn't answer, gestured to the others. They got into the Mercedes and drove away, leaving exhaust and uncertainty hanging in the air. Noor stood on the street, a 9-year-old girl clinging to her waist, dawn breaking over a city built on bones, and felt something inside her crack like ice. "Greta," she whispered. "How did you know I'd be here?" "I didn't. I saw the car from my window, saw them taking you. I just—" She looked up with eyes too old for her face. "I didn't want them to hurt you." A child who understood what it meant when black cars came at dawn, who'd learned to recognize the architecture of disappearance, who'd chosen to risk her father's anger to save someone who'd been kind to her. Noor knelt down, eye level with this impossible, dangerous, beautiful gesture. "You should go home before your parents wake." "Will you be safe?" Yes. It was a lie. They both knew it. But lies were currency in occupied cities, and sometimes they were all you had to spend. Greta hugged her once more, fierce and quick, then ran back the way she'd come. Noor watched her disappear around the corner. A flash of white nightgown, blonde braids, innocence that shouldn't exist in a world like this. The music folder sat on the cobblestones. Noor picked it up. Inside, tucked between sheet music, was a note in child's handwriting. "Thank you for teaching me about the silence between notes. I think I understand now. G." Something broke inside her chest. Something that couldn't be repaired with training or orders or justifications about the greater good. The extraction point was a fishing boat in Bremerhaven, leaving with the morning tide. Noor had 12 hours to get there. 12 hours to cross a country that was hunting her, with photos that could save lives and evidence that could end hers. She took a taxi to the train station, paid cash, bought a ticket to Hamburg under another false name, her 5th identity this month. Sat in a third-class compartment between a soldier on leave and an elderly woman knitting socks. The train lurched forward. Berlin slid past the windows, already receding into memory. Buildings, streets. The Gestapo headquarters where she'd walked through walls 3 times. The house in Grunewald where a 9-year-old girl played Beethoven with gap-toothed determination. Noor pressed her hand against the compact hidden beneath her clothes. 143 names. 143 people who might live because a woman had learned to become a ghost. But ghosts weren't free. They were trapped between worlds. Not quite alive. Not quite dead. Not quite human anymore. The train gathered speed. The soldier beside her fell asleep with his head against the window. The elderly woman's knitting needles clicked with metronomic rhythm. Outside, Germany passed in browns and grays, a landscape drained of color by years of war. In her pocket, Greta's note felt heavier than any secret file. Thank you for teaching me about the silence between notes. The silence between notes. The space where music lived. The gaps that gave sound meaning. The emptiness that made beauty possible. Noor understood now what she'd really been teaching. Not piano, not music theory, but the knowledge that sometimes the most important things existed in spaces between truth and lies, between loyalty and betrayal, between the person you were and the person war demanded you become. The train crossed the border into territories she didn't recognize. The soldier woke and got off at a station whose name she immediately forgot. New passengers boarded. The world kept turning. In 8 hours, she'd reach the fishing boat. In 12, she'd be in international waters. In 3 days, she'd be in London, debriefing handlers who'd congratulate her on a successful mission while avoiding her eyes. She'd be home. Safe. The woman who walked through walls 3 times and lived to tell about it. Except she wouldn't tell about it. None of them did. The missions stayed classified. The names stayed redacted. The ghosts stayed ghosts, honored in silence, remembered in spaces between official histories. Noor closed her eyes and saw Greta's face. Saw the young soldier she'd confused. Saw Hauptsturmführer Vogel slumping in his chair. Saw all the people she'd saved and all the people she'd damned, and the impossible mathematics that claimed some lives were worth more than others. The train rumbled through the German countryside. In her hidden pocket, photos of 143 resistance leaders waited to be developed, analyzed, acted upon. 143 futures hanging in the balance. And in another pocket, a note from a child who'd learned that silence could be beautiful, written in a house where her father signed death warrants between breakfast and lunch. The war would end eventually. Historians would write books. Generals would take credit. Politicians would make speeches about sacrifice and victory and the price of freedom. But some prices were too high to calculate. Some sacrifices too complicated to celebrate. Some victories too painful to acknowledge. Noor Inayat Khan had walked through walls 3 times, had stolen from the devil himself, had become a legend in a war that devoured legends as fuel. She'd won, and the winning felt exactly like losing. The train carried her towards safety while behind her, in a house in Grunewald, a 9-year-old girl practiced Beethoven and wondered why her piano teacher never came back. In Gestapo headquarters, officers searched for a ghost who'd already disappeared. In London, handlers waited for intelligence that would save lives at the cost of the woman who'd gathered it. The silence between notes. That's where the truth lived, in the spaces between hero and villain, between duty and conscience. Between the person you'd been and the person you'd never be again. Noor opened her eyes, watched Germany pass by through dirty windows, felt the compact press against her skin, evidence, salvation, damnation, all compressed into a few grams of film. She'd walked through walls. Now she'd have to live with what she found on the other side. The train rattled northward toward the sea, toward England, toward home. And in the spaces between the rhythmic clacking of wheels on tracks, if you listened carefully enough, you could hear the sound of a woman becoming a ghost. Or maybe it was just the wind. Epilogue. 3 months later, London. The photographs had saved 91 lives. 52 agents were extracted before the roundup. The operation was delayed, then cancelled, then restructured. It was considered a major intelligence victory. Noor Inayat Khan received a commendation in a ceremony she didn't attend. She'd requested immediate reassignment. Back to France. Back to occupied territory. Back to the walls she'd learned to walk through. They tried to refuse. Told her she'd earned rest. Told her she'd done enough. Told her the odds of surviving a second tour were statistically negligible. She went anyway. Because 143 names on a list meant 52 were still there. 52 people who'd die if someone didn't walk through walls again. Because a 9-year-old girl had saved her life and would grow up in a world Noor was trying to build, one stolen file at a time. Because ghosts don't retire. They haunt until the haunting is done. Noor Inayat Khan parachuted back into occupied France on a moonless night in February. She lasted 8 more months before the Gestapo finally caught her. She never talked, never revealed a single name. Died in Dachau concentration camp, shot in the back of the head, her last word a whispered prayer in 3 languages. Her official record was classified for 50 years. The Gestapo officers who interrogated her never understood how one unarmed woman had stolen their secrets. Twice. 3 times. As many times as it took. They never learned the secret. Some walls weren't meant to stop people. They were meant to show you who you really were when everything else was stripped away. And some people, when they reached that core, discovered they were made of something harder than stone. Noor Inayat Khan had walked through walls, and the walls had never stood a chance. The end. Historical note. This story is inspired by Noor Inayat Khan, a real SOE, Special Operations Executive Agent, who worked as a radio operator in occupied Paris. She was the first female wireless operator sent to France and was awarded the George Cross posthumously. While this narrative takes creative liberties with specific operations, the courage, sacrifice, and moral complexity faced by SOE agents were devastatingly real. Thousands of women and men served in occupied territories, living double lives, making impossible choices, and paying the ultimate price for freedom. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not just for what they accomplished, but for what they endured to accomplish it.